Well, welcome everybody to Montessori Lives. And this evening, we're very privileged to have with us Shi Drake. And Shi is a pre-service teacher who's been looking for satisfying answers to what will allow her to teach in an authentically child-centered way. And she's also interested in finding a deeply satisfying career path in education. And well, let's start with how you ended up in discovering Montessori and why you think that would be a deeply satisfying career path and what answers that has given you.
Okay. Well, it was actually my husband who introduced me to Montessori. He went on a pilgrimage when he was in his 20s and discovered it in Italy while he was traveling there and decided he wanted that for his children. So when our children came along, he introduced the program to me, and I was sold instantly. The beauty of the classroom, the learning environment, the dedication of the teachers, the the setup, the approach to the children's learning. It was very obvious to me this was child-centered learning, because the children were the focus, and the children's learning, the child's development, that was all very much very obvious. That was central to the Montessori process program. And so we put our three girls through the early years program. We weren't able to pursue them through high school because the school was just not located anywhere near us, unfortunately. But the foundation that they had acquired through the early learning program was, I believe, and I know, really set them up for being inquisitive learners and developing internal order, which I really value, and my husband does as well, and what I think is essential for all children. So it was a co-parent, I guess, in a way, with us in our home.
What was it that you really valued about their education? I mean, you said that it made them inquisitive learners. Do you think what was it about their Montessori early childhood experience that made them that, as opposed to, say, having an inquisitive mother?
So in early learning, they're focusing very much on building that internal order and the practical life skills, and being focused on their stage of development. So what I saw in my children was they were developing a love of learning because it met them where they were at. It seemed to understand them as children, and it supported them in where they were developmentally, socially, and academically, even as as little 3-year-olds when they started there. So I know that their curiosity in play was deepened there, because they came to understand. I know this very much so. I watched them and observed them, that they're engaging with just ordinary everyday materials was very deep connection, definitely.
And did you notice changes in them when they went to primary school in a non-Montessori setting? Where did
Yes.
they go to primary school?
Actually, it went to West End State School.
Hmm.
So we were very fortunate that our middle daughter had a teacher who was Montessori trained, and so for a couple of years there, she got to consolidate more of her learning process in the early years. My other two girls, definitely very different. That the classroom structure, and being sat at a desk for 6 hours a day, and being being routinized the way mainstream does, did change their attitude to learning, and we had to support it a lot more at home, I would say, to bring the balance between what they were experiencing there at West End versus what we wanted them to enjoy about learning and be intrinsically motivated.
How old are they now, and what are they doing in their lives at the moment?
So our middle daughter is actually studying education. She's taking a break at the moment, but she's pursuing education. She's 27, so she took a couple of gap years and went traveling around the world to see what she wanted to do with her life, and came to understand for herself that, yes, pursuing education and giving children, again, an authentic learning experience is what she wanted. Our eldest daughter runs a business with her husband, and they have 2 children who they're going through private schooling in the Catholic system, which we're trying to support in the best way possible. So we try to provide a balance in our home and in the interactions that they have with us to support that, again, the internal order that is really important for us, that we think, because they're only 5 and 8, so they still need that to develop those layers of learning where Montessori really excels, which is about discriminating, classifying, categorizing, and observing, which I personally believe, and I know is embedded in Montessori, is essential for that learner to develop those passions for learning. And again, being an intrinsically motivated learner, not because of any reward system or being responded to by external factors like the teacher, saying, I'll keep you in at lunchtime, or, you want to get a good mark because of this.
Do your daughters remember their Montessori experience? What do they talk about?
So we did Montessori here in Brisbane and in Sydney, because we lived there for a while. And they have wonderful, warm memories of sharing. I guess how they describe it now is community, being in a place where they shared ideas, they shared events, they shared experiences every day. But also, I think the key thing is that they say that they got to choose, and they felt that there was it was more fun to learn because they got to choose each day, and they were more being self-directed. They had a much greater connection to their learning.
Yeah, choice is the engine of motivation.
Yeah.
And so what led you, where are you now in your career, and what led you there from that experience?
So I entered education. Our youngest daughter has considerable disability, again, where Montessori and its principles have helped me in her education and in raising her. So I am an arts technician in Ed Queensland. So I work with students every day through an arts medium. But essentially I'm paid like a TA, but I'm an arts technician. And after 15 years in the mainstream and observing and watching classrooms, and my daughter had reached a point my youngest daughter, in her education where I could go pursue my goal to teach. So I started the Masters of Teaching in Early Childhood. And after my first semester, I was deeply dissatisfied. And I wasn't expecting to be deeply dissatisfied. I thought, I'm pursuing an education degree. This is about teaching and learning. I'm going to be fulfilled. But it was
Changed
very,
the world, right? You
pardon?
changed the world by engaging with children.
Yes, but it wasn't that. It was very much, there was a lot of rote learning is how I experienced it was, here's the PowerPoint, here's the textbook, read,
Memorize.
analyze, and feed it back to me.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, I'm never going to survive this degree if this is what I have to do for the next 4 years. So in my second semester, I finally got a teacher who worked in early childhood. And this is where this also started to form my long goal towards pre-service teacher education. And came across a Montessori unit Montessori that I could include in my teaching subjects, and wanted to incorporate those philosophies and those processes into my assessment items, and was effectively, I guess, not rejected, but it was not received very enthusiastically by my lecturers. So I continued to pursue alternative education approaches in my degree, and was hitting that negative feedback and that pushback, but decided that I just couldn't continue pursuing my subjects in the way that was prescribed, because it just didn't resonate with me at all.
So you were in the education system for 15 years, and then now you're studying education.
Yes. And I think it is important because I've seen a great deal. I've seen, I've worked in an art school where we did the International Baccalaureate. I've worked in several mainstream schools around Brisbane, and it's been important background for me to understand what it is I don't want, and what I feel is not hitting the mark as far as nourishing children, not just teaching and learning, but nourishing them
Yeah.
to
So
want to learn.
what are some of the conversations you've had with your education professors about what you've noticed and what you don't? You're probably a bit different, I guess, in that most pre-service teachers don't have any experience of the system already and don't have children who've gone through alternative education. So you've had the drapes kind of parted, and you've seen a bit behind what's behind there, and you've raised some uncomfortable questions. What sort of conversations have you had, and what's been the response?
I've had some positive conversations, and I've had some very negative conversations. As I said, in some assessment items, when I presented my perspective on a say assessment in point specifically, I've been failed on certain items in an assessment item, an assignment, because I didn't present what my university lecturer wanted. I presented alternative perspectives on assessment, even though it was heavily researched and I could demonstrate the necessity of pursuing alternative forms of assessment, it was not received, as I said, was not received enthusiastically. I have reached out to my lecturers many, many times to say, how can I integrate what you are teaching, what you want me to do, the teaching model that you have, how can I integrate that with an approach that I wish to pursue, a highly integrated approach, which will actually meet a greater differentiated model than what I currently feel I'm getting. And
what are some of the assessment methods that you tried to pose instead?
so I asked to simply present students' work from a child developmental perspective, right? Bringing in not just the fact that they are where they are socially, emotionally, and academically. I also asked if I could present assessment items in which a child would produce a work through art. So if a student, for example, a student was struggling with a grade 3 boy in a prac, was really struggling with a writing task. He had considerable learning difficulties. I asked, could a student not be presented with the opportunity to make a small video or do an alternative form of assessment like a storyboard, or make a story in the form of a book, and was told that no, there's no capacity for that. I would have to break down the task for the student in the traditional way, in the way that the curriculum permitted, so that the students still completed the same task.
What sort of assessment techniques were being promulgated in your courses that you're being asked to use?
So it just what is out there at the moment: writing tasks, maths tests, very boilerplate assessment items of measuring, again, very standard techniques of, does a student tick this box? Does a student, has a student demonstrated this model, this aspect of writing? Have they demonstrated that they can do literacy and analysis? But again, it's all focused on a very narrow band of how a child thinks or works, rather than allowing the child to, say, if you have a student with ADHD who will be struggling to sit through reading writing tasks day after day after day, if this student can be permitted to be given an opportunity to present their work in another way. No.
Was it ever discussed in your education classes, the logic of failing a child? So, for example, with adults, if I'm getting on board an airplane to fly somewhere, I want to know that the pilot has passed his or her exams, right? I want to know that they just didn't do an online self-paced course where there was no assessment. Same with a surgeon. I'd want to know that my surgeon had passed her exams and was pretty competent. And so I can see the point in failing or passing adults, right? But with children, is there ever a point, do you think, in failing a child? And was that question ever raised in your education classes?
Yes, yes. And when I would look at, as I said, if I presented in an assignment and we had to review a piece of work, that a sample of student work, and we had to pull it apart, and I would highlight, well, here the student has demonstrated a high level of analysis. This is a student with ADHD, or this is a student who is presenting a point of view that, while it doesn't look like exactly like what you're expecting, what it shows is there's key features of that child's development and their social emotional well-being, which tells me they're on the right path. No, that was rejected because it was purely, have they ticked this box? Have they met the rubric? And the rubric was very prescriptive, always. So the social emotional child, markers of a child's awareness of themselves as a learner was never considered valid. I was completely invalidated there.
Mm. In vocational training, the emphasis is not on grading; it's on pass fail, or not really failing even. It's that here's what you need to do to pass. Try again. And why do you think we don't use that same approach in educating children?
Why
don't we use that vocational training approach of going back to the learner and saying, here's what you need to do to pass, try again. Here's what you didn't do adequately, and here are the steps that I can help you with. Let's keep trying until you pass. But there's no option to fail. We just keep going until you pass.
Yeah.
Why do you think we don't use that approach with children?
So in my pracs, as I've done in primary school, I can tell you that there's no option for that. There is timelines, there is deadlines. End of. There's just a deadline. There is a window that the learning has to be achieved, and all the boxes have to be ticked, and the lesson plans have to be met, the unit plan has to be met. And you, as the pre-service teacher, the teacher aide, your supervising teacher, everyone's goal is purely to get every single student in that classroom to tick every box.
Yeah. So it's about pressure of getting through the curriculum that the state has deemed is appropriate. And a lot of the time, and a lot of the time, my daughter at the moment is in grade 9, and there's so much of what she's doing that she keeps asking me, when am I going to use this stuff? And I'm to the point where she's reaching the upper limit of my math knowledge, and I can Google it and I can watch Khan Academy and kind of school myself in it quickly so I can help her. But I'm getting to and she knows it. And so she says, well, look, you got through 60 years without knowing this stuff. Why do I need to know it to get through my life? And it's a good question, and I don't really have an answer for a lot of the stuff that she's learning. It just seems very irrelevant.
Well, I can say working in high school, as I said, as I have for 15 years as well, with children primarily who are disengaged, have trauma-affected learning, are EALD background, or children who have disability, but even just the everyday student in the classroom who is just falling behind or is just trying to keep up. The curriculum just does not give time. The unit planning, the term structure, the whole way that the mainstream is structured means that every lesson is just fighting to get through. Every item has to be ticked off, and every student has to be taught and just swallow that information, swallow the knowledge, and then regurgitate it when the time comes. When you're falling behind, it's hit and miss whether you catch up. And it gives me no pleasure to say that working in the mainstream. And I know that there's good schools out there, and there are schools who are putting so many systems and initiatives in place to try and fill the gaps for those children. The fundamental problem you've got is a teacher who's got so many deadlines and so many boxes that she's got to tick, he or she has to tick. You've got a limited amount of time. You've got competing elements of other subjects that they're having to do throughout the day. For me, what I see and what I know from working with students very closely, one-to-one, is that they are not engaged with their learning and they're not motivated to learn. Yeah. They don't actually even have a process of understanding how they learn. Mm. This is a huge block that we already have, because I can work with grade 10 students who are operating at grade 4 and 5 level. How does a student skip through or get through the cracks and they're at grade 10 and they're operating at a maths and English level, grade 4 and 5? And now the gaps for me to fill are enormous, but the gaps just keep getting bigger and bigger as they go through every subject and every day and every term. So for them to not even have the foundational skills of a mindset, but also as I said, an internal order is really important for me, because they don't have those layers of understanding themselves and of understanding what it is that they're learning, to know where to put it, to know how to put a schema for it, to know how to put a classification for it, to know how to order it, so that they can build on that knowledge. Mm. So they already come to high school with this gap.
Mm. So can you talk about your search for answers, and where have you looked?
I looked through my schools first, and I appealed to teachers for guidance. And mostly they could only lead me through to the mainstream. It was my study of Montessori and PDs, actually a lot of PD. I've done so many PDs, and have just sifted through them to find ways that I can improve myself, but also enjoy what I'm doing. So I have done time in working in kindergartens, volunteering at other schools, but then also, as I said, have expanded my research and my journey into all alternative forms of education. So Montessori, Reggio Emilia, Steiner, and democratic education models. I believe that altogether there is so much for me to be able to pull from all those models that I can work with any child and be able to draw something to help whoever's sitting in front of me. So I've had to go out there and do the searching and the looking for myself. No support from my university, or as I said, from the education system that I worked in. And it was just finding networks, finding people, going to every learning opportunity that I could, and speaking to people in other states, in other countries. I traveled overseas to find inspiration and a more socialist, holistic approach to education.
I remember when you first contacted me a year or two ago, you were about to embark on a marathon trip through Europe as part of your search for answers. Can you talk about that?
Yes, so I needed to understand a context of these education models. It's not enough just to know them here in Australia. I wanted to understand them in their original context, to know a comparison and to understand where they came from. But I also wanted to see other approaches to education. I wanted to see how other countries and other people valued education and what they believed was the role of education. So I was going to do the Reggio Emilia research study tour, which takes you to Italy, to the town of Reggio Emilia, and there's a week-long conference to attend there with professionals from all around the world gathering for a week-long conference. And there you are exposed to pedagogies and classrooms and school settings in which you see a classroom in action, but you see this philosophy also in action. From there, I decided to take the idea of that research tour and expand it for another 2 weeks. And I went to 5 countries, 11 cities, and explored Reggio Emilia, Montessori, Steiner, and democratic education across all those cities. Because I wanted to know the social, political, the emotional, the physical, as well as the educational approach to teaching, what these policies and politicians valued, but also in these alternative models, in their settings, in these countries, which have rich histories, how do they perceive education? And not to diminish what we have here in Australia, but what I saw was deep cultural connection to learning, but a valuing of education that was deeply embedded on a community level that showed to me that we need to do more. We need to actually see learning and nourishing learning as a whole community. And it's that what I felt before I left was that education here, the way it's spoken of, the way parents interact with it, the way teachers would interact with education, I felt very much that people thought learning just happened in a school. You leave your home, you go to school, you learn, you go home. Mm. There didn't seem to be as I said, this is just me anecdotal, that communities and families took that learning process as a whole responsibility for all of us. And that there was definitely this idea that you go to work, you do your job, you go home. And that you didn't push your work beyond the curriculum. And you certainly didn't integrate arts methodology or arts ideology into your teaching. So I wanted to go to Europe to explore what I knew just from my research here, that these were definitely philosophies and ideologies that existed, but I needed to see them firsthand. And I needed to experience the teaching institutions, the schools, the students, the everyday person, the galleries, the art institutions, the conferences, all of it, to give myself a better understanding of what it was I felt was missing from my education here.
Such dedication. I mean, what pre-service teachers would do that level of research, like set up a study tour of their own? What did you can you say something about what you valued about each of those big four, the Reggio, the Montessori, the Steiner, and the democratic education? Did they strike you as different, and what was valuable about each one, or what was characteristic of each one?
Well, firstly, what I can tell you 100% is the rights of the child. Everywhere I went, that language was used in every conversation, and it wasn't just a buzzword or an idea that just arrived. The rights of the child to be nourished and to be treated as not as a small person who was not yet fully formed, but as an individual who had the right to a happy, peaceful, and fulfilling education. And what was also really palpable was the belief that there wasn't just curriculum learning, that it was about pushing the boundaries of children's curiosity and their love of learning. 100%. That it wasn't just a matter of here's a classroom, here's a set of desks, here's a set of textbooks. Those are all the ingredients that you need. No, that was not at all what I experienced. It was that the teachers were fulfilled for a start, because they were creatively challenged and they were creatively fed. From there, they could give to their students. And I saw students producing work at 4 and 5 years old that I've not seen my grade 10 art students produce. Because
so you're saying that aspect is common to all of those 4 alternatives?
Yep.
What would you say was different about those approaches?
So I would have to say, okay, there is definitely cultural valuing of education. I did see that. There's no doubt. And again, it's not to diminish what we have here in Australia, but there is a deep, deep cultural connection to education. It obviously goes back hundreds and thousands of years, and we have a new and young country. Okay, so obviously you can't compete with that. But what I can say, what I saw in them. Sorry, Mark, say again. What did you ask me?
Oh, just about, you talked about the similarities being the focus on the rights of the child and the encouraging children to love learning. What would you say are the differences between those 4, Reggio, Montessori, Steiner, and Democratic?
So I believe all of those methods embody that. Absolutely, because it is 100% about the child and the child's learning and the child's motivation to learn. Comes from a place of valuing you, the child, the whole organism. And so when you're surrounded by a classroom that is filled with artifacts and materials that are inspiring, that give you opportunity to create, then obviously that comes from a base already that is more supportive of a child's developing a love of learning.
But how do those 4 approaches achieve that result differently?
So this would be their pedagogies and their philosophies. So for Reggio Emilia, it's very much there's the philosophy of the child discovering their own voice in their learning. So that, I believe, is a core that runs through all of them. Montessori has, for me, I think, an element that Reggio sees in a different way, or maybe doesn't deal with the same. So Montessori what I believe is very, very vital is that it attends to the internal ordering and structuring of that child. In Steiner, what I saw was, again, very much a similar vein of, okay, what is guiding that child, what motivates that child, what drives that child to come to school, to be curious, to be engaged. But with Steiner, there is again, I'm still learning these. I'm not an authority, but what I saw was less structured, in that they were much more organic in their daily classroom learning. And the democratic schools was very much a place where children went by their own internal system, their own internal motivation, and pursued their learning on a daily basis, entirely self-directed. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, you did. Yeah. So coming back to Australia, what gives you hope? Like, what keeps you going? How do you think, what is there a light at the end of the tunnel in terms of being able to change the system, or do you feel like you're banging your head against a brick wall with Queensland education that won't change, or do you see hope there that we can?
Well, again, organizations such as yourself and TEA and ADEC and many other organizations around the world that I've met along the way, who are all pursuing this same fight. That's what gives me hope each day. I keep going. But also I believe that I have to. If I walk away, I will be no different to the teachers that I see that have left education this year alone, last year and the year before, and feel completely despondent that there's nothing I can do. The system is too big. I can't do anything. Now, we know that the mainstream has a concentration of wealth and power. We know that. But that doesn't mean that we can't make a change. And what I know I need to do is pursue my hope that we can change the teacher education models, the teacher education degrees that are out there, because I believe we have to change it for the next generations, because they are the ones who are going to be supporting the generational change that has to happen in education for my grandchildren and for my grandchildren's children. So I have to try. If I give up, then no, I don't know that anything will change.
Do you have any thoughts about how what the best directions are for trying to dismantle what William Glasser called external control ideology? The idea that everything has to be controlled from outside, and that Glasser talked about how that is just so demoralizing for students, that it just saps their motivation. But it's really hard to get people with the power to change that, to see that perspective.
Yes, it is. And I can only tell you from working so many years in education, is there is language. Firstly, the system is not going to change quickly or overnight. As I said, the mainstream doesn't really question. And so what I do every day in my work, with the people that I work with, is I open a dialogue, or I have conversations where I hope to provoke them to think and to reflect on themselves in their everyday interactions with children, because there's quite an antagonistic relationship that exists between student and teacher, unfortunately. So what we need to do is to provoke them to just think and reconceptualize the role of the teacher, that you are not in the hierarchical position with the child, and that maybe think of it from the child's perspective, because this doesn't actually happen very much at all. But I know what we need to do is use the language that they use to get them to understand that systems like Montessori, for example, are running almost parallel to what you're doing. We're just working more with the child. So things like internal order, you would characterize as self-regulation, right? That's the latest, that's the hope that more and more teachers and teacher education and teacher PDs will be more about self-regulation in the classroom, because until teachers in the mainstream start to actually question how they're approaching students and how they're approaching their learning and the language that they use, it will be a very, very much an uphill battle, because the whole structure, the political structure, the hierarchical structure, the systems that are in place, the behavioral management systems are all geared towards narrowing your focus so that it's very downward looking, and you don't really look up to question, and you don't assess, are we doing the right thing? Because again, we've got to meet this goal. We've got to achieve this end. So
That by control.
Pardon?
And we do that by controlling students.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems that there have been so many great writers in the last century who've emphasized this idea that controlling learning does not work. You know, we've got John Taylor Gatto 30 years ago, who was New York's Teacher of the Year 3 years in a row, who resigned saying basically that I cannot continue doing what is basically he saw as oppression against children. He saw schools as prisons, or setting children up for prisons. We've got A.S. Neal, Rudolf Steiner, William Glasser, Maria Montessori, so many great writers, but the message doesn't seem to be getting through to the mainstream system.
It's because it's bureaucratically formed, it's got complex layers like a honeycomb. It has formed itself into a honeycomb, so that if you topple one little layer, that's okay. It's got other layers that it's built to support itself. Mm-hmm. So you've got to try and break that honeycomb down from within. We've actually got to get the teachers and the leadership teams within these schools to start to question, to actually ask themselves, am I doing this for what purpose? Am I actually understanding the student? Am I aware of where I am and what I'm doing? Just recently, I said to someone was having a frustrating day, and I said, well, you do realize that we expect children to sit at desks from 5 years of age, 5 days a week, 6 hours a day for 12 years. I said, could you do that? Could you actually do that? Yeah. And the look on the face was quite telling, and it may seem like small and insignificant, but the moment of realization that person had, that they'd never thought of it that way. I said, but this is what we're asking. You're asking a child to do that. Could you as an adult actually do that? No, you couldn't. And it's those little provocations. And I know it may seem like it could take a really long time, but to break down this system means we have to bring a new generation with different thinking in, but the current system, the current people that we have need to be provoked to think and to question.
That's a great point that you're making. Trying to dismantle the system from within is going to be more effective than starting alternative education models outside the system that can't really break in very effectively. But asking questions, asking provocative questions from within the system is probably going to have more effect in the long run. What do you think is a book that all educators should read? If you were advocating one book, if you could ask all of your fellow pre-service students and their professors to read one book that might provoke some thinking in them, what would that be?
Well, coming purely from my perspective, which is to teach in a remedial way and teach in a therapeutic way based on children's neurological development, I would say a book by actually, I think I have it here, which is Judith Howard's Trauma-Aware Education. Now, it may seem rather dramatic or strong in its title and its message, but what it does is give you understanding of the child's perspective. And this, I can promise you, is deeply lacking, not just in pre-service teacher education, but in the current education system that I work in. There is very little, despite how much systems they have in place with guidance counselors and student well-being and pastoral care. Teachers are not understanding how students are interacting with their education, what they experience, what they're feeling. And while this book is about trauma-aware education, what it provokes the educator to think about is what's happening for that child. And what I say and what I do is clear in my head. But what that child is seeing and what that child is feeling may not be anything what you're imagining. And when you do that, when you think that, when you feel that, you open up the classroom for yourself in a way that you can't begin to fully understand, but it gives you an insight into a child. But it also, even if the teacher doesn't feel aware or ready enough to understand it, it at least gives them a greater compassion and empathy for what may be going on. And that is at least a place that they can start to build better relationships with their students.
Can you repeat the name and author? Cara or Alex, would you mind just Googling that and putting a link in the chat?
It's Trauma-Aware Education, Dr. Judith A. Howard. There's actually a conference coming up this year in October, in which Dr. Howard is the main instigator. As I said, it's about trauma-aware education, but it's also about understanding education from or learning from a child's perspective, not the educator, not the education system, but from the child. What is the child seeing?
Does anybody else have a question or a comment they'd like to ask Shi?
Oh, I've got lots. I really, yeah, I really like what you've said about societally, like, and the language that we use. Like, I think it would be very useful, and I have seen it done where I think it came out of Sydney Uni, where they over a short period of time went back and looked at the way education had been reported on in the media. And I really feel it. You know, I came from a household that highly valued education. Even though my parents didn't really, you know, there was one book in the house when I was growing up, and yet education was about so much more. It was about this continual. It was before YouTube. My parents were always looking and learning about how to do things. You know, they would have thrived with YouTube. So I think it's that attitudinal approach that we don't have. We have had for so many years a very vocational, a very dry approach to what education's about.
Yeah.
And so I really like that. It's given me a lot to think about. I've just got, we don't have the cultural connection to learning. And I think that's what the First Nations voices have done for us. There's been this slow creeping in of another approach, along with multicultural approaches as well. You know, I once remember someone from Western Sydney University, they do this beautiful project out there, and he just arrived in the country, and one of his first questions to this group who were doing some work around writing was, well, where are the poets in the country? And it was like, oh, crickets, you know, they're not around, you know, because we don't see them. We don't see things in that role. And the other thing that I think is really sad is that our masters of teaching students are getting a very narrow view of literacy and what that looks like, you know, still, you know, but and I don't think it's because they don't want a broader view and they don't understand a broader view. It's just that that's where they're going to end up too. I've spoken to some students who have recently graduated, and they are very hopeful. But then when they move into schools, it's like they're taken a step back, and they need to just toe the line, even though they would like to be able to do some really interesting things that would be far more dynamic, and have better outcomes for kids. I also, and we've run out of time, but I wonder also how much lockdowns have really affected us here, particularly because we have had this really poor approach generally to what education really means, and I think it's shaken people perhaps a bit. Anyway, lots to think about. Thank you, Shi.
As I said, if we can just I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to try and get the universities they don't have to present alternative education as part of their degrees. Just give students exposure to the philosophies, to the methods that's out there. This is not just so that they can have a better pedagogy. This is about preserving teachers for the long run. If they know there's something else out there, if they know that there's something else that they can employ to keep them inspired, that's a huge step forward than feeling defeated as a new teacher, or you're in your first couple of years and thinking, I'm lost in the system. There's nothing else for me. This is what alternative education models celebrate and can do so well, is there is more, and there is so much more that you can offer. And again, it's because it gives you so much satisfaction and enjoyment as the teacher. It's like what they say in the airplane. You got to put your mask on you first before you can help anybody else, right?
Absolutely.
If the educator's not happy.
Shi, you mentioned TEA, Transforming Education Australasia. So that's a relatively new organization in the last couple of years that aims to bring together all of the alternative education approaches under one umbrella. And you're part of that. And there's also people representing Steiner, democratic education, Montessori, hopefully soon Reggio, and several other groups as well, home education, and who am I forgetting, Alex? Anyway.
More bespoke, unique methods through Gabrielle.
So I think, the more that we can speak with one voice, because as you beautifully pointed out, the commonalities of these approaches, especially the big four, are far greater than their differences. And we've tended to focus on the differences between Steiner and Montessori and democratic education, but really there are so many similarities, and the voice for change in those communities is pretty consistent about valuing children's rights and also children's need for self-determination, rather than being controlled. So I put a flyer in the chat, and TEA is having another webinar on this coming Wednesday, 2 days time, 7 p.m. And anybody's welcome. It's a free webinar. You can scan the QR code and register. It's been, and you're welcome to come along to TEA meetings too, if you'd like. Just Google us and find out when the next meetings are. Shai, it's been great talking to you. So interesting, and we could talk for several hours more, I'm sure.
Thank you for listening.
Yeah, really appreciate your time. Thanks
Oh,
everybody for coming along, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.